Hi everybody, this is Erica, and I wanted to talk about becoming an esthetician, especially later in life. If you're thinking about pivoting into like a totally different career or something like that, which is something that I did. I went back to esthetician school at the age of 44. And that I was by far the oldest person in the class. I think everyone else was like 22, 23. So I was definitely the oldest person, and I kind of had to get over that and just sort of say, I'm just at a different stage of life than they are. They were still interested in partying and drinking and all that kind of stuff. And I was really there because I wanted to be an esthetician. I really wanted to learn it. But I, kind of want to say this is just from my experience, obviously. I don't know what everyone's experience is, but it is difficult to transition later in life. It is. I'm not going to kind of sugarcoat it and say everything went completely smoothly and, there were no challenges. Of course, there were challenges. So, when you're trying to pivot later in life, you've already gotten established in one career, and you're trying to almost start from ground zero at an older age, and that kind of puts you at a disadvantage, and it kind of puts you at an advantage in the same breath. So the disadvantage is that you are middle-aged or older, and you're trying to establish a client base, you're trying to establish a reputation, you're trying to establish a knowledge base, all those kinds of things that are completely different from what you had been doing maybe for the last 20 years. So it's not to discourage anyone from making a career change, just to say that that is just a potential challenge you're going to face. And so, there is a ramping up point. When you're an esthetician, there is a ramping up period where you're trying to establish, again, your client base, your reputation, all that kind of stuff. And you don't quite have that time on your side to ramp up. You also are potentially going to take a pay cut. So I went through financial struggles because I had come from like a corporate finance background where I was making, a pretty good salary and was kind of on that track of, traditional kind of like white collar worker to being someone more in the trades. And initially that is a pay cut. So estheticians, starting pay, if they're paying you hourly, you often see quoted, at least in my area, which is Massachusetts, you often see quoted like maybe $18 to $23 an hour. So, obviously if you're doing services, you're going to get, and you're getting commission, you're probably going to get like a 40% or 50% commission off the service you're doing. So it's not going to be an overnight rich kind of story necessarily. I hope someone has had that story out there, and if they do, please comment below. But it was definitely trickier for me, so now I'm thinking of different ways to approach being an esthetician. So it's not just necessarily trading time for money, but also really trying to get my knowledge out there and reach a wider audience than I ever could if I was just working on people one-on-one. So if you get a client in, you can talk to them and get information from them and inform them about certain things, but that's a very limited scope. So I'm trying to, and this is kind of why I have my YouTube channel now and I'm more active on it, is really get the message of skincare out there. And also, like, what an older esthetician is facing is similar concerns to what the clients are facing. Often the clients that are coming in are middle-aged and older, and they're experiencing all sorts of skin concerns that you're facing too. So you have like this vested interest in knowing about this information. And the other thing is that esthetician school is really just a starting point. It is, sorry about that, it's by no means the end point. So, just see it as like a starting point as far as what you're learning and things like that. But I had to educate myself a lot after I left esthetician school because it didn't really cover the scope of what, you really need to have such a strong knowledge base to become sort of considered a very knowledgeable and reputable and, that kind of thing as an esthetician. So, and for me, esthetician school just barely touched upon it. I mean, I remember us doing facials on each other, and the facials basically encompassed washing, exfoliating, moisturizing, and putting sunscreen on. And that was it. That was the extent of the facial. And facials, once you get out into the workforce, are so much more complex. And people can do that kind of a facial at home. Why would they come and pay you to wash, exfoliate, and moisturize your skin? So obviously you have to learn techniques that are much more advanced than that. That's going to compel them to actually come into the spa. So that's just a little bit of what I've experienced kind of pivoting later in life. And now I'm 50, and I'm still, I live in a seasonal community, which is something that I've chosen to do. But the downside of living in a seasonal community is that we rely on the tourist community to basically be like our bread and butter for clientele. And when they're not here, we don't have clientele. So we often have to take jobs that are kind of outside aesthetics and things like that to get us through the slower months. So that's been my experience as an esthetician. I hope that gives someone some insight if they're thinking of pivoting. I would, if I had to do it over again, I would have more of a financial cushion under me so that I could handle sort of the dry periods and the ramping up period better. And I would definitely be aware that it's going to take some time to get established as an esthetician. That doesn't happen overnight. So hope that helps. Bye.